We have been on a journey with Jesus through the Gospel of Luke. Today we hear from Luke beginning in chapter 18, verse 31, and we will continue into chapter 19 to verse 10. Listen with me now for God's word to us from Luke. Then Jesus took the 12 aside and said to them, "See, we are going up to Jerusalem, and everything that is written about the Son of Man by the prophets will be accomplished. For he will be handed over to the Gentiles, and he will be mocked and insulted and spat upon. After they have flogged him, they will kill him, and on the third day he will rise again." But they understood nothing about all these things. In fact, what he said was hidden from them, and they did not grasp what was said. As he approached Jericho, a blind man was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard a crowd going by, he asked what was happening. They told him, "Jesus of Nazareth is passing by." Then he shouted, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Those who were in front sternly ordered him to be quiet. But he shouted even more loudly, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stood still and ordered the man to be brought to him. And when he came near, he asked him, "What do you want me to do for you?" He said, "Lord, let me see again." Jesus said to him, "Receive your sight. Your faith has saved you." Immediately he regained his sight and followed him, glorifying God. And all the people, when they saw it, praised God. He entered Jericho and was passing through it. A man was there named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd he could not because he was short in stature. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him because he was going to pass that way. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today." So he hurried down and was happy to welcome him. All who saw it began to grumble and said, "He's gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner." Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, "Look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times as much." Then Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and to save the lost." This is the word of the Lord. Today we have a new member class for those who are planning to join this congregation. I have the privilege of spending time with new members when they join the church, and near the end of our time together, I talk to them about finding their place in this community of faith. I tell them that when we enter a new community, sometimes we have middle school cafeteria stomach. That's that horrible feeling you get inside if you're new to middle school and you walk into the cafeteria. You are certain that everyone else knows everyone else. You are sure that they know everything. Where the forks are, what to do with your tray when you're finished, which table the cool kids will be sitting at and they'll glare if you walk too closely. And then you know that they are all staring at you. And they can all tell that you don't know anyone and you don't know anything. You want to disappear, or you want to fit in, or you want someone to hear when you ask a question, or you want to hear someone call your name and invite you to their table. I wonder if the blind beggar had middle school cafeteria stomach as he sat by that road near Jericho. Being a blind beggar probably means you have that feeling a lot. Left out, ignored, passed by. When the blind beggar heard the crowd and asked what was happening, he learned that Jesus of Nazareth was passing by. And then he shouted out to Jesus only to have the crowd tell him to be quiet. Undeterred, he shouted even louder. And Jesus stood still, heard the blind beggar's cry, and ordered that the man be brought to him. Jesus asked, "What do you want me to do for you?" And the man asked to see again, and Jesus responded, "Receive your sight." I wonder if Zacchaeus had middle school cafeteria stomach as he climbed up into the sycamore tree. In the crowd wanting to see Jesus but unable to see him because he was too short, a chief tax collector, someone who was working for the occupying Roman government, a traitor. He was working for the enemy and talking with the enemy and touching the enemy's money. He was likely charging too much for the taxes so he could line his own pockets with profit. He was a rich man. Now, growing up, we paid less attention to the tax collector part and to the dirty money part and lots of attention to the short part. Singing Zacchaeus was a wee little man was he, but we never sang Zacchaeus was a rich man or Zacchaeus was a bad man. Zacchaeus ran ahead and climbed that sycamore tree to see Jesus of Nazareth pass by. Being a rich chief tax collector probably meant you had middle school cafeteria feeling a lot. Shunned, despised, no one wanting to be your friend, maybe guilty and not sure what to do about it. Jesus looked up and saw Zacchaeus, called him by name, and invited him out of that tree. Jesus invited himself to stay at Zacchaeus' house. Zacchaeus hurried down, happy to welcome Jesus into his home, and then he proclaimed, "I'll give half of everything I have to the poor. And if I've wrongly taken anything from someone, I will pay it back 4 times as much." Jesus told Zacchaeus, and the grumbling crowd overhearing it, and Jesus tells us, the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. Jesus stops still and listens to the person by the road. Jesus looks up in the trees and calls by name. Jesus is willing to talk to the people by the road and in the trees, and not just the people who are gathered around him in his crowd on the journey. Jesus seeks out the people on the edges, on the fringes, on the margins, the people sitting by the road or up in the tree. Can you think of a time when you had middle school cafeteria stomach and someone saw you and they stopped for you and they listened to you and they acknowledged you? Remember that feeling? Remember that transformation, that relief, that feeling of good news of grace in the very pit of your stomach when you were included? That's the ministry of seeking and saving, a life changer, a soul saver, a difference maker, all because someone stopped and noticed you and included you. I need to confess something. After 25 years in ministry, when I have an opportunity to preach, I go first to the files of old sermons to check them out. I never repeat one in entirety, but sometimes there's a great sentence or a good idea or a story to share. So when I went back to read my sermons about the blind beggar sitting by the road or about Zacchaeus in the tree, I realized that I always put myself and you in the position of sitting by the road like the beggar or climbing the tree like Zacchaeus. I always put us in that place in the story. I always put us in the place of need, waiting for Jesus to pass by, hoping for good news. And there is much in that place. Sitting by the road or peering through the leaves of the sycamore tree, there's good news in that place. There is transformation and hope and life-changing, soul-saving, difference-making in that place. But this week, I have once again heard the call to be a disciple and to follow Jesus, to live the way of Jesus in the world. Like many of you, I've been reading Waking Up White, and maybe that's what made a change. In this passage, it means I need to be willing to stop along the way to listen to the person crying out by the road. It means I need to be willing to look up into the tree and call to the person who's sitting there. And maybe you are called to stop and listen, to look up and call. Maybe you and I are called to the ministry of seeking, called to listen and to look for people on the edges and on the fringes and on the margins of our lives. It's easy to live in a bubble. It's easy to have tunnel vision. It's easy to walk down the street and never notice the person who's sitting by the side of the road, to be overwhelmed by the crowd and miss the one who's sitting up in a tree. It's easy to focus on ourselves and our lives and our crowd and miss the edges and the fringes and the margin. I believe there are people sitting by every road we travel. There are people sitting in metaphorical trees wondering if we might notice them. People who feel invisible, ignored, silenced, maybe despised or guilty. People who cry out for attention and we tell them to be quiet. When the blind beggars shout louder in church, we tell them to be quiet because we don't like disruptions. When they cry out asking for sight, we tell them to shush because we don't like politics in church. Don't distract us from the journey with Jesus. The problem is that Jesus is standing still and listening to them. Will we? When the dislikable person climbs the tree, we keep our eyes focused down. Maybe we mean well, maybe we think it's better to avoid them and avoid any potential confrontation. Just don't take my eyes off of Jesus and his people. The problem is, Jesus is looking up and talking to the person in the tree. Will we? Jesus talks with them and eats with them, and he was flogged and killed partly because of it. Maybe that's why I'm hesitant to associate with Jesus in this story. We talk about hospitality a lot around here. We know we need to be welcoming, but I wonder what we mean by that exactly. Are we going to stop and listen? Are we going to look up and call out to the people on the edge? The elders of the church met last Monday, and some of them gathered to talk about hospitality in our community. I was out of town, so I missed the conversation, but I got to read the notes. I think that once again that question was raised. How will I know who the visitors are? What if I greet someone and they're already a member and maybe they've been here longer than I have? Well, here's the answer to that. It doesn't matter. They might be a member who's been here 25 years and they still have middle school cafeteria stomach every time they come because they don't know if they're included. And they're waiting and watching to see if you'll notice them. And all you have to do is say, "Hi, my name is Millie," and they'll say, "Hi, my name is John or Mary," or whatever, and it doesn't matter. Several months ago, I ran a meeting for a group of our church staff. I asked each person to share an experience when he or she felt like a fish out of water, One person shared about growing up in a working class family and eating a meal for the first time in a country club. What to do with all that silverware? One millennial in jeans and a plaid flannel shirt told about going to a workshop, finding himself in the middle of a sea of professional people wearing suits and ties and things. And one staff person, the only African American in the room, said, "Every day, everywhere." Raised by parents who encouraged every opportunity meant most of life was lived as the only black person in a crowd of white faces. Some of us were surprised, shocked. Wow, middle school cafeteria feeling every day, everywhere. Probably wherever we go, someone's feeling it. Someone's wondering if we'll notice. Will we stop and listen and look and talk? If you've never felt like a fish out of water, you need to get out more. You need to get out of your bubble. Go to another neighborhood, eat in a different restaurant, go on a mission trip. Feel that feeling in your stomach so that you'll know what it feels like to beg by the road or to climb a tree. And then open your ears to listen for the person crying out on the sideline. Look up and open your eyes to the person who's watching you through the leaves. There are people right here, right now, with that feeling. Will you talk to them? There are people at school or at the office. Will you talk to them? There are people who don't fit in, who are very aware that they don't know everything, who are left out and pushed out and shut up and shut down. Will you talk to them? There are people on the edges and on the fringes and on the margins, and they're wondering about us. Will you talk to them? They are waiting for life-changing, soul-saving, difference-making people who are going to listen and look. Are we those kind of people? Thanks be to God that Jesus of Nazareth passes by and then stops to listen and to look up. May we have the courage to be his people in the world. Amen.